Shalom, I'm Pastor Matt McEwen with Yeshivat Shuvu and KosherPastor.com, and welcome once again to one of our weekly Torah portion studies. This week we're beginning the book of Exodus, which in Hebrew is called Shemot. The word Shem means name, and the OT sound at the end of that indicates the feminine plural. So Shem, name, Shemot, names. So the book of Exodus is known as names in the Hebrew Bible. And it's known for that because of how the book starts. As we look at the book of Exodus, or Shemot, chapter 1, it says, "These are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each coming with his household: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad, and Asher." The total number of persons that were of Jacob's issue came to 70, Joseph being already in Egypt. Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all that generation. But the Israelites were fertile and prolific. They multiplied and increased very greatly, so that the land was filled with them. A pastor a long time ago taught me a way to remember all of the sons of Jacob in their birth order using a very silly, nonsensical sentence. And the sentence is this: Reuben's stretch Levi jeans did not give, and instead zipper just broke. Now that sounds very silly, because it is very silly, but in that silly sentence, the first letter of each of those words corresponds with the first letter of the name of that son of Jacob. And so it's a way for us to remember them in order. Kind of a silly thing about blue jeans. But anyway, moving right along. A new king, this is in verse 8, a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, "Look, the Israelite people are much too numerous for us. Let us deal shrewdly with them so that they may not increase. Otherwise, in the event of war, they may join our enemies in fighting against us and arise from the ground." Now, there's a footnote in the translation of the Torah that I'm reading from. This is from the Jewish Publication Society, the JPS, and it says here on this footnote, or they may get up out of the land. So they may rise up from the ground may also mean they may get up from the land. In other words, they may just leave. So they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor, and they built garrison cities, or store cities, for Pharaoh, Pithom and Ramesses. But the more they were oppressed, the more they increased and spread out, so that the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. There's some very interesting things happening just in the first few verses. And as you know, when we go through a Torah portion study like this, sometimes we only focus on one or two verses. The one that I really want to focus on this morning is this verse here in chapter 1, verse 8, where it says, "A new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph." Let me teach you a Hebrew word that possibly we've talked about in the past, but maybe not very deeply. And this word is machloket. Machloket. A machloket is a disagreement, a difference of opinion. And there are many such versions of a machloket that happen in Jewish history between this rabbi and that rabbi, between this commentator and that commentator, between this historian and that historian. So as we know, we've talked about the concept of Shevaim Panim LaTorah, the 70 faces of the Torah. There are many different ways that the Torah can be interpreted. It's like a many-faceted diamond that has 70 faces, that the different ways that you turn it in the light, you could see different aspects. This is the case with this verse number 8. And by the way, I should mention that in the Torah, in the original scroll, there is no chapter or verse division. These things are not Jewish. In fact, they're medieval Christian. But just so that we can find out where we are, this convention, even in Jewish Bibles, stands. I will tell you, though, a lot of times in Hebrew Bibles, the verse will be one verse number earlier than in an English Bible. Sometimes in an English Bible, they won't start a chapter with a verse 1. It will give it kind of a heading, and it won't count it as a verse. In fact, a slight bit of a rabbit trail here. There are 3 or possibly 4 numberings of the 10 Commandments, for instance. In the Hebrew Bible, "I am the Lord your God" is commandment number 1. In other words, that commandment is that that you cannot deny the existence of God. It's a commandment to believe that there is a God. In English Bibles or Christian Bibles, that is looked at as just a statement. It's not the first commandment. So sometimes we get a little bit off in our verses because we're not going with the Jewish rendering. But anyway, all that to say, in this version of the scripture, it happens to be number 8. And it says, a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. Here is the machloket. This is the disagreement. Some rabbis believe that this should be taken literally, and this is a new king, a new pharaoh that came to power who did not know Joseph. That is very curious to us. Joseph was second in command of all of Egypt, the mastermind behind the plan that not only kept Egypt from suffering in a famine, but kept other nations around it from suffering in a famine. As you know, this is how Joseph's brothers and his father came to get to Egypt, to come to get food from Joseph himself. It's hard for us to believe that a new pharaoh could come into power after Joseph died who would not know about Joseph. As one rabbi put it recently, it would be like talking to an American who did not know about George Washington. It just doesn't make any sense. So one rendering of this, one interpretation of this verse, is that there truly was a new king and he did not know about Joseph. Hard to believe, but that's one way that we can interpret this verse. But there are some other rabbis on the other side of this machloket, on the other side of this disagreement or difference of opinion, which say, no, this was the exact same Pharaoh, but he chose not to know about Joseph. This is even more sinister, and maybe even more hard for us to believe, that this same Pharaoh who valued Joseph, who put a ring on his finger, who made him in charge of everything, who rode with him in a chariot, that this same Pharaoh would forget on purpose, it seems, who Joseph was. It seems to us that this is impossible, but we have other examples of this maybe in our own lives, and certainly more examples of this in the scripture. Think about it like this. Joseph is a hero. He's a person who has done a lot to help not only Egypt, but the surrounding nations. He's obviously given a lot of power and authority. And then he moves his family in. They're shown a lot of respect, a lot of deference. They're given the land of Goshen. They're allowed to do their own thing, and they're treated very, very well. But something happens. You see, the Jewish people were given a command, and it's a command that God aids them in, and that command is to be fruitful and multiply. And that's exactly what happened. They began to be so numerous that it made Pharaoh nervous that perhaps they would turn against them and become an enemy, and that they would be more powerful than the Egyptians. If this other side of this disagreement is accurate, that it really was the same Pharaoh, and he just chose not to know about Joseph because situations had changed. Situations on the ground had gone through a metamorphosis. Now, I'm looking at a potential enemy. Isn't it interesting that when it benefits us, when something becomes a threat, even a friend, that we will lash out against that friend? You know, King David HaMelech, said in the Psalms, something that is fulfilled, if you will, in the life of Yeshua, of Jesus, by saying that one that I called a close friend has lifted his heel against me. How many times have we seen that people are close, but then all of a sudden one of them rises up and seeks to destroy the other, either to destroy the character or reputation of the other, or literally to take the life of the other? This is as old as Cain and Abel. We see many, many situations where there's Cain and Abel, Jacob and Esau, many different examples in the scripture where people are at one point close, and then something changes, something happens, and then it all goes very wrong. I think probably for us that come from a Christian background, we see this probably most glaringly in the life of Judas Iscariot. Judas Iscariot is an interesting figure, and we're not really sure where we get his surname, Iscariot. It can mean Ish-Kariot, Judas the man, the Ish, which is the Hebrew word for man, the man from the village of Kariot, Ish-Kariot, or it could mean Judas Ish-Sakari, which describes a type of dagger that was used to literally stab people in the back. The Sicarii were a group of zealots that were against the Romans so much that whenever there was a public gathering, they would hide these small blades in their sleeves and literally stab people in the back as they stood and keep on walking to cause chaos and murder at these gatherings. So we're not really sure what this means. Is Judas Iscariot the man from Keriot? Is he Ish Sicarii? Is he a man who's a part of this terrorist group, really, we could say? Who's to know? But we do know this, that he never really gave his life to Yeshua. He never really got what the message was all about. Never really repented. Never really changed. It was almost like in the life of Judas, while it suited him, he was on the side of the Messiah. But when situations changed, when it suited him, he really didn't want to know him. This seems easy for us to imagine with Judas. But as you and I know very well, another apostle, another Talmid of Yeshua, Shimon Kepha, Simon Peter, did the exact same thing. When situations changed, he acted as if he did not know his master, his rabbi, his friend, his confidant, someone he had lived with, someone who he had eaten with. You see, Simon Peter, when the pressure was put on, he reacted in a very human way. And perhaps we shouldn't down him too much. Who's to know that myself, that I wouldn't have denied that I ever knew Yeshua? It's interesting the words that he uses in that denial. And I've been in Israel to the traditional spot outside of Caiaphas' house where this denial took place. The words that he used were, "I never even knew the man." Doesn't that have an echo of a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph? If the rabbis on the other side of this machloket are correct, then this was simply not true. It was the same Pharaoh. He knew Joseph very well, but conditions had changed, and he was looking to save his own skin. He was worried that these children of Israel would rise up against him. In fact, it is this Pharaoh that is the first person to refer to Israel as an Am, a nation. This isn't just a family. This isn't just a bunch of cousins and brothers and sisters and things. This is a new nation that is rising up, that may be a threat to me. And because of that, I never knew the man. What an interesting thing for us to think about here in this week's Parsha. When times get tough, do you still know the Messiah? When times get tough, do you still hold to this belief system that you have brought yourself to? Maybe even this. You that have come from a church background and entered into a more messianic understanding and have been putting into practice some of these things that we talk about here at Kosher Pastor. When there is pressure from the world that says, why are you doing this Jew stuff? Why are you doing these Jewish things? You're not ethnically Jewish. Well, you're just a wannabe. You're just a poser. You're just a faker. Will you be strong enough to keep to your commitment, to understand the gospel and to understand the Lord in this new context? Or will you act like you never knew it? Once again, I'm Pastor Matt McEwen from Yeshivat Shuvu and kosherpastor.com, wishing you a Shabbat Shalom. And also, it is my prayer that you stay true to your convictions, you stay true to the Messiah, that you are not like Pharaoh that says, I never knew Joseph, that you are not like Judas, who when conditions change, you benefit from not knowing Yeshua, and especially that when conditions change or there is pressure added, that you're not like Simon Peter and saying, I never knew this Yeshua. My prayer is that you will have all strength and stamina and preparedness as you study and learn and grow closer and closer in this commitment to the Lord. That is my prayer for you. May the Lord richly bless you in every way. If you have been sick, may you receive what we call in Hebrew, refuah shlema, a complete healing of both body and soul and spirit. B'Shem Yeshua, in the name of Yeshua, the King of Kings and our Prince of Peace. Thank you once again. Shalom.